Welcome to another episode of Translating Technobabble, where we discuss trending topics, best practices, and demystify technical jargon. I'm here today with Kim Maida, Head of Developer Relations at Auth0, a Google developer expert in web technologies, and we'll be talking about identity. And you've been working in identity and access management for about 3.5 years?
Yep. Now I manage teams whose purpose is to sort of educate the tech community about identity.
That's great. A lot of our viewers are engineering managers. So this big topic today, what is identity?
So that's one of the things that comes up a lot for me is if I go around and tell like family and friends I work in identity, then they often are sort of assume that, oh, I work for the Secretary of State issuing driver's licenses, or maybe I help people recover from identity theft, like credit card fraud or something, which is neither of those are the case. I work in digital identity. So essentially digital identity encompasses sort of the scope of authenticating users, logging users into applications and being able to know who they are, and then also being able to know, are they allowed to access certain resources, get access to certain information that an application might provide? So I think one of the things that sort of clarifies this for people too is the digital identity of a user is basically dependent on the context of your application. So if you provide an application that, say, sells shoes online, then the digital identity of your users is going to be sort of something like their address, their shipping address maybe, their credit card information, and maybe their order history, the list of like the last 10 pairs of shoes that they bought. And as you can see, this is very contextual to the application that they're operating in.
So as an engineering manager or executive, I'm already thinking about identity. I know who our users are. I know our application needs to be able to manage users and store their information securely. What else do I need to think about?
Well, I think that one of the biggest challenges that people face when they're going to take on an authentication or identity project is kind of knowing where to start. So one of the things that comes up is you really don't know what you don't know. And identity encompasses so many different things. It's about the login, how do you log users in securely? How do you store their information securely? How do you make sure that specific users can access specific information? How do you make sure that other users cannot access that information? And then sort of the whole overlying security of all of that information. And when it comes to the topic in general, the problem I think that a lot of developers and teams face is they're handed down this assignment of, okay, implement login, right? And they might have no experience doing this previously. So they go to Google and they search, authentication or something. And then there's this wealth of information out there of varying qualities, and they can go and read something, and maybe they think it sounds good, but if it's even slightly incorrect, they're going to walk away with a lot of misinformation. And if you have incorrect information and you go and build a login system on top of incorrect information, then you have a huge challenge on your hands later, because it maybe wasn't best practices, it maybe isn't really secure, maybe you're just solidifying misunderstandings. So really, the thing is, like, distinguishing correct, up-to-date information is very challenging to do if you don't have kind of a solid backgrounder on what do all of these terms mean, what are all of the pieces that I need to think about. A team coming in might say, okay, I need like a username and password, and then I need, some kind of layer to make sure that the user has certain permissions to get resources. But beyond that, knowing how to do that within the context of whatever technologies you're using can be very challenging. There's a lot of standards out there, so you can go and read the standards, but understanding the standards is really a whole nother level because they're full of jargon, full of complex terms. There's a lot of different techniques and implementation strategies that are driven by different architectures and things like that.
Yeah, it sounds like even if a developer had a background in identity management, just keeping up with the standards is something that would be really critical and somewhat time-consuming. So is it fair to say that if I'm an engineering manager, I should not assume that just because I have a solid team, of senior engineers that they're automatically going to understand how to do the most up-to-date, modern, standards-oriented version of identity.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have amazing teams, amazingly talented individuals working on your team who have other priorities. You have a product to build, right? So you have features to launch, you have deadlines related to those features, and keeping up to date with identity best practices is probably not super high on that list, honestly, for most people. And that it shouldn't necessarily be different than that. That isn't something that your team should necessarily have to worry about.
So I'm terrified of the unknown. I'm scared to ask this next question. What if we get identity wrong on our team and our application? How will that affect our organization?
So it can be catastrophic, right? If you think about things like data breaches, we always hear about data breaches in the news, and it can really bring companies down. You think about the press that those companies receive from that. Putting their users at risk, at that level of risk, is just unacceptable, really. And then everybody says, oh, this company, they're a huge company, they should have known what they were doing, right? They should have done their due diligence. Why did this happen? And, public perception of that company just plummets.
It's really obvious how a catastrophic data breach like that could significantly impact an organization. What are some ways that are less obvious that might impact our organization, maybe more from an internal standpoint?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the biggest things that happens is teams waste time. They waste time on churning, they waste time on sort of trying to familiarize themselves with these complex, dense open standards. And then if they don't understand all the nuances, they still can get it wrong. They're not necessarily aware of how exactly they're getting it wrong. Or even worse, they could just be totally oblivious to the risks. I actually was on a team once in a sort of a previous life, I guess I could say, when I was an engineer, and we were given sort of the task of building a pizza ordering application for a chain of pizza companies. And we were told, of course, people need to be able to log in. So we hand-rolled our own authentication system. And when we did this, we didn't really know what we were doing. I mean, we understood the basics of don't send passwords in clear text and things like that, but the core of the product was not the identity part. It was the ordering of the pizza. How do we do that? How do we give them the user an excellent experience ordering pizza? And so the identity part was something we had to do. Nobody really understood it all that well, so we were kind of like, well, we should log people in with a username and password and give them some kind of artifact so that we know who they are, and then everything will be okay, right? So we really just felt like we were flying by the seat of our pants because nobody in the team was an identity expert. Nobody really had a ton of experience doing this. We just sort of looked things up and said, okay, this looks correct. We're going to try to do this. And the other part of it is we had a distinct lack of confidence in this portion of the application. So we felt really good about the UI. We felt really good about the pizza part. There was sort of all of this fancy stuff that we were able to do to make that experience really nice for the user. But the login was just sort of, and this just has to be done, so we're going to do it. We're not sure we're doing the right thing, but we have to do it, and we have a deadline, right? So it had to get done. There was a little bit of strife internally in the team about it because nobody was an expert. So it was kind of like, well, I think it should be done this way. Well, I think it should be done this way. How are we going to agree on this? And, oh no, we're out of time to talk about it, so it's time to move on. And this type of situation can lead to things like not only just internal strife in a team, but also a loss of trust in management. If management doesn't sort of understand the scope of a problem like identity and say, here, you have the right time and resources to sort of do this, or here's access to, a product that could do it for you or something like that, then it becomes one of those things that's like feature critical because you can't launch the system without authentication.
So if I'm responsible for the success of my team and organization, it sounds like I need to be concerned about catastrophic data breaches, lost resources due to churn and lack of experience, and then also how those things might affect both team dynamic and how my team relates to leadership and their confidence in management's ability to lead. Mm-hmm. So how do I address this?
So really, the biggest thing that you can do is not roll your own. Not roll your own identity solution, because as we sort of mentioned before, this causes a lot of sort of churn in the team, and also just most people who don't make it their core business to do identity don't have sort of the widest scope on all of the things that they need to consider for this type of thing. So really, you should try to leave identity to the experts. You should look for a service that provides identity for you, because when their core service is to do identity, they have an entire company of individuals whose whole goal is to deliver an excellent identity experience that's secure, that's safe, that's easy to use for the developers who are going to be implementing it, that's easy to manage for the managers who are going to be leading teams who have to implement it. And so really what this is, we call this IDaaS, which is Identity as a Service.
Can you explain to me what IDaaS is?
Yeah, so if you think about the terms SaaS and PaaS, software as a service or platform as a service, it's essentially that, but it's identity as a service. So it is an identity platform as a service. They'll keep up with current best practices. They'll sort of adjust the actual platform and the solution to make sure that those best practices are followed, usually at minimal impact to the customer, so the companies that are using the platform. And you essentially don't have to spend a whole lot of time taking out resources from core product engineering in your company to focus on something like identity, which you may or may not know a whole lot about. You can leave it in the hands of people whose entire business is to know a lot about it and to implement it well.
So it sounds like there are some options that are kind of generalized, out-of-the-box solutions that are comprehensive and standards compliant. What if my application is a little bit more nuanced and has sort of specific requirements that may not fit within an out-of-the-box solution? Is that possible?
Yeah, that's totally possible. IDaaS platforms are generally very powerful. They usually have a lot of features, right? So they might, they'll have user management sort of no matter what. They'll have access management no matter what. But straight out of the box doesn't work for everyone. A lot of companies have nuanced flows that they need people to go through. There are, sort of certain cases where maybe when a user logs in, you want to get some information and put it in a database and store it to maybe it's location data or something. And you want to be able to serve them content that's specific to their login location, something like that. Now, because of the nuanced needs, you should really look for an IDaaS solution that is extensible, that has extensibility, so that you can sort of buy and then also build a little bit to make sure that it suits your needs. And there are solutions that will allow you to sort of implement anything that you need to do with regards to the authentication flow and like the user's data. For example, maybe you need to add some information to their user profile when they log in, and just sort of out of the box, authentication systems often don't just do this like for you. But if you get a solution that is extensible, then you can easily sort of attach to that login event, user logged in, we can get some information, we can add it to their profile if we need to, based on sort of any kind of conditions that we want to define. So I would definitely look for a solution that provides extensibility.
So it sounds like if I leverage an IDaaS, we're going to spend a lot less time building out our features. We're going to get better security. We're going to have more time for core feature and product development. What am I missing?
So another thing that an IDaaS can really help with is scalability. If you have 100 customers and you go to 100,000 customers, there's going to be a lot of things about managing those users or offering them new features that you're really going to want that are not necessarily a walk in the park to implement if you're doing it by yourself. For example, maybe you are going to need multi-factor authentication. You want to make sure that people have that sort of extra layer of security when they log in, they have to sort of also make sure that they have some additional way to say, yes, this is really me.
Right.
Maybe you need to implement something like single sign-on. Maybe you want to be able to keep users logged in on multiple devices or something like that. These are things that are quite challenging to sort of roll on your own. But if you use something like an IDaaS, they offer these features. You can have those features basically enabled with a touch of a button later on, even if you don't need them up front. And then also, there's the aspect of user experience. So we care a lot about, when we're making applications, we care a lot about the user experience.
Absolutely.
Of, like the pizza ordering thing. We cared a lot about, was it easy to order a pizza? Was it easy to, and beautifully visually pleasing to drop the toppings onto the pizza or whatever. But the user experience of core features like authentication matter a lot. If you have users who get really frustrated, like they can't log in or they get logged out all the time, you're going to lose users.
Yeah.
So it really just increases customer retention to have a login experience that is beautiful, also is a pleasure to use, is easy to use, and then also sort of under the hood is safe and secure.
So Kim, as an identity expert who's relied upon to provide expert guidance for organizations, if there's one takeaway from this whole conversation, what would it be?
It would definitely be, don't roll your own. I have rolled my own in the past, and it wasn't a pleasant experience any of the times that I've done it. The thing that happened was, after we had sort of done this, stumbling through the process of trying to figure this out and do it ourselves proprietary, I found out about Auth0, actually. That was the first IDaaS that I came across in the wild. And as I was looking at the dashboard or the features, my mind was blown by the amount that was provided, the expertise, all of these things that really would have just saved us an incredible amount of time and an incredible amount of headache in the development of these projects where I was trying to roll my own. So my bottom line for all of this would be, leave it to the experts, find a solution that works for you in sort of the landscape of IDaaS that's available right now, and just don't build your own.
Kim, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
For translating a critical and complicated technical subject, identity. And thank you for joining us. We hope that you get a lot of value from this conversation and that you'll join us next time. Until then, don't roll your own.